Jim Dawson had seen a lot of strange things on his farm, but this was new. The first thing he noticed when he walked out to the hay shed that morning wasn't the crisp country air or the golden sunrise stretching across the field. It was a sleek, white luxury sedan sitting dead center in his barn, right where his tractor was supposed to be. At first, he thought maybe he was hallucinating. Maybe the long nights of tending to the farm were finally messing with his brain. But no. The car was real. And so was the woman standing next to it, inspecting her nails like she had all the time in the world. Jim stood there for a moment, taking it all in. The woman, blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, expensive-looking designer purse slung over her shoulder, hadn't even noticed him yet. She was busy tapping away on her phone, completely oblivious to the fact that she was trespassing on someone else's land. He cleared his throat, loud enough to shake the birds from the rafters. The woman barely glanced up. "Morning," Jim said, keeping his voice even. "Something I can help you with?" She let out a dramatic sigh, as if he had just asked her to solve a physics equation. "Oh, you must be the farmer," she said, giving him a once-over, her lips twitching in mild disapproval at his dusty jeans and work boots. "I was just looking for a spot to park for a bit." Jim blinked. "You parked in my hay shed." She nodded, completely unfazed. "Yeah. All the other spots were taken." She waved a manicured hand toward the empty field beside them. Jim followed her gaze, then looked back at her. "Ma'am, there's an entire open pasture right there." She sighed again, this time with a little more frustration. "Right, but I needed some shade. Do you have any idea how hot it gets in a car without air conditioning?" She fanned herself dramatically. "Besides, I won't be long." Jim folded his arms across his chest. He'd dealt with stubborn animals, unpredictable weather, and the occasional farm equipment disaster, but nothing in his years of experience had prepared him for a full-blown Karen. "This ain't a parking lot," he said, jerking a thumb toward the barn. "I need this space to work." She scoffed. "I'll only be a few hours. You can work around it." He let out a slow breath, willing himself to stay calm. "Lady, you're on my property. You can't just—" She held up a finger, cutting him off. "I'm on an important call." Jim's left eye twitched. This woman had just interrupted him, on his land, to take a phone call? He watched, dumbfounded, as she turned her back to him and started chattering into her phone like he wasn't even there. "No, Brenda, I told you I need the organic soy matcha, not that processed garbage. Just fix it." She let out an exasperated sigh. "Anyway, I'm at some farm or whatever. Just waiting until my lunch reservation." Jim clenched his jaw so hard he was surprised his teeth didn't crack. The gall of this woman. The absolute nerve. He could have argued with her, could have yelled, could have called the sheriff and had her towed, but something in his gut told him none of that would work. She wasn't the kind of person who responded to logic. No, she needed something else. Something bigger. Something memorable. His gaze flickered toward the towering stacks of hay bales lined up just outside the barn. A slow, mischievous grin spread across his face. If she wanted to leave her car here so badly, well, maybe he'd help make sure it stayed put. Jim turned on his heel and strolled toward the barn entrance, whistling. He spotted his farmhands, Cody and Matt, taking a water break by the tractor. "Boys," Jim said, rubbing his hands together, "I've got a job for you." It took less than 10 minutes. The first few bales of hay were stacked gently, almost politely, around the car. But as Karen kept yapping on the phone, blissfully unaware, the boys picked up speed. Soon, hay was dropping left and right, piling up higher and higher. By the time they reached 30 bales, Cody had to stand on the back of the truck just to toss them over. Jim leaned against a post, watching as the final few bales were carefully maneuvered into place. And still Karen talked. "So I told him, if you're not flying first class, then why even fly at all?" she was saying, laughing as if she had just delivered the funniest joke in the world. Then, finally she turned. And screamed. "What? What have you done to my car? Jim bit the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing. Karen's pristine white sedan was now a buried treasure, completely engulfed under 50 bales of tightly packed hay. Only the very tip of the antenna peeked out from the golden mast. Karen spun toward Jim, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Move it! Move it right now! Jim scratched his chin. I dunno, seems pretty stuck to me. Her hands clenched into fists. This is illegal. You can't just bury my car. Jim raised a brow. Oh? And what do you call parking on someone else's property without permission? That's different, she spluttered. Do you even know who I am? I have connections. I'll call the mayor. Jim crossed his arms. Go ahead. She yanked out her phone and dialed furiously. After a few seconds, her face twisted into confusion. What do you mean he's busy? Ugh. She hung up, nostrils flaring. Fine. I'll call the police. Jim shrugged. You do that. Karen stormed a few feet away, jabbing at her phone as she dialed 911. Meanwhile, Cody and Matt exchanged looks, barely holding back their laughter. Jim stood there, unbothered, while Karen ranted at the dispatcher. Yes. I'd like to report a crime. This horrible man has committed agricultural vandalism or something. I don't know. Just send someone now. She hung up with a huff and turned back toward Jim. You're gonna regret this. Jim smiled. We'll see. 15 minutes later, a familiar sheriff's truck pulled into the driveway. Sheriff Dale stepped out, pushing his sunglasses up his nose as he surveyed the scene. His eyes flicked from Jim to the massive hay pile, then to Karen, who was now on the verge of throwing an absolute fit. What's going on here? Dale asked, sounding more tired than anything. Karen stormed forward. This man has trapped my car. Arrest him. Dale scratched his head. You mean the car that's parked inside his barn? On his property. Karen blinked. Yes. And? Dale sighed, rubbing his temples. Karen, did you even ask before parking here? Karen flailed her arms. I didn't think I had to. It's a barn. Jim leaned toward Dale and said, deadpan, I just thought I'd help make sure her car was nice and cozy. Cody let out a snort. Dale exhaled slowly, then turned to Karen. Lady, you better hope I don't fine you for trespassing. Karen's jaw dropped. What? Jim just smiled. Oh, this was far from over. Karen's scream echoed across the farm, a high-pitched wail that sent a few birds scattering from the barn rafters. Jim had expected some level of outrage, maybe even a tantrum, but the sheer theatrical performance unfolding in front of him was almost impressive. She stomped her designer-heeled foot into the dirt, arms flailing like a windmill caught in a storm. You absolute, you backwoods, you, I can't believe this, she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at the mountain of hay still sitting atop her luxury sedan. Do you have any idea who I am? Jim, arms folded across his chest, studied her with the same level of concern he'd give a particularly annoying fly buzzing around his face. Still haven't figured that part out, he said. But I do know you parked on my land without asking, refused to move when I asked nicely, and now you're causing more of a fuss than my cows do when they miss breakfast. Karen's mouth flapped open and shut as she tried to process the words. For a moment she seemed to be at a loss, as if the idea of someone not instantly caving to her demands was foreign to her. But then her face twisted, lips curling into something between a sneer and a snarl. She jabbed a perfectly manicured finger into the air. You will remove that hay right now. Jim rocked back on his heels, pretending to consider. You know, I'd love to, but my back's been actin' up lately. Maybe if I had a reason. Karen's eyes nearly bulged out of her head. A reason? My car is buried under a pile of farm trash. You want a reason? How about I sue you for destruction of property? Jim shrugged. Go right ahead. But since this is private property and you parked here without permission, you might just end up paying me for damages. Karen let out a strangled noise somewhere between a gasp and a growl. Then, her face lit up with sudden realization. Fine. You leave me no choice. She whipped out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling the cops. You'll be in handcuffs before the hour is up. Jim nodded. All right. Go ahead. Karen blinked, thrown off by his lack of fear. Wait, you're not scared? Jim chuckled. Nah, Karen. You see, our sheriff ain't too fond of trespassers. So I reckon I'll be just fine. Karen's triumphant smirk faltered slightly, but she still pressed the phone to her ear. Jim watched as she launched into a dramatic retelling of events, her voice shifting from enraged to tearful within seconds. Yes, officer. I need immediate assistance. A crazed farmer has committed an act of vandalism against my vehicle. It's an emergency. My property is being held hostage. Jim exchanged a glance with Cody and Matt, who were both barely holding in their laughter. Karen suddenly snapped, What do you mean it's private property? I don't care. I need someone out here now. She paused, her face twisting further as the response on the other end clearly wasn't what she wanted to hear. Well, you know what? I'll just sue the entire department. And the mayor. And... She went silent, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? What does that have to do with... No, I don't have permission to be here, but that's not the point. Hello? Hello? Karen slowly pulled the phone away from her ear and stared at the screen in horror. They hung up on me, she whispered, sounding genuinely baffled. Jim nodded. Yeah. Dale don't have much patience for nonsense calls. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. Oh, we'll see about that. She turned sharply, folding her arms. Fine. I'll wait for the police to come to their senses and deal with you properly. Jim let out an amused sigh. You do that. It took about 15 minutes before Sheriff Dale's truck pulled up. Jim watched as the man stepped out, taking his sweet time as he adjusted his belt and pushed his sunglasses up his nose. He took one long look at the hay-covered car, then at Karen, then at Jim. Dale. Thank God you're here. Karen practically ran to him, grabbing onto his sleeve as if she had just been rescued from a burning building. This monster, she pointed at Jim like he was some kind of outlaw, has committed an atrocity against me. Dale gave Jim a slow, knowing look. That so? Yes. Karen cried. He buried my car. I demand you arrest him immediately. Dale exhaled through his nose. You parked on his land? Karen's face twitched. That's not the point. Dale rubbed his temple. Pretty sure it is the point. Karen stomped her foot again. I have rights. Dale crossed his arms. And Jim here has the right to not have strangers dump their vehicles in his hay shed. Karen looked ready to combust. So you're just going to let this hick get away with vehicular imprisonment? Dale tilted his head. Vehicular what now? Karen's hands flailed. He trapped my car. This is illegal. I have connections. I will have your job. Dale pulled out a notepad, flipping it open. Let's see. You parked on private property without permission. Ignored the landowner's request to leave. Then called me out here for a non-emergency, which, mind you, is actually illegal. Karen's mouth snapped shut. Dale nodded. That about sum it up, Jim? Jim fought the urge to grin. Sounds about right. Karen gasped. You can't be serious. He's the criminal here. Dale sighed, closing the notepad. Lady, best thing you can do right now is apologize, have Jim and his boys move the hay, and leave without causing more trouble. Karen stood there, shaking with rage. Apologize? She spat, like the word itself was poison. I would rather die. Jim shrugged. All right then. He turned back toward his house, making it clear he had no intention of touching the hay anytime soon. Karen sputtered. Wait, where are you going? You can't just leave my car like this. Jim tossed a lazy wave over his shoulder. Sure can. Karen let out a strangled screech. Dale shook his head. I got about a dozen real issues to deal with today. If you don't want to do things the easy way, You can take it up with the court. But I wouldn't count on them siding with a trespasser. Karen was vibrating with rage, her perfectly styled hair now slightly frizzed from all her dramatic movements. For a brief second, Jim wondered if she might actually explode. But then, her shoulders dropped, her nostrils flared, and she clenched her jaw so tight he could hear her teeth grinding. "Fine," she finally spat. "Get this garbage off my car." Jim smirked. "Say please." Karen looked like she wanted to throw something at his head. Instead, she closed her eyes and inhaled deeply through her nose. After a moment, she muttered, "Please." Jim clapped his hands together. "See? That wasn't so hard." With the help of his farmhands, the hay was carefully removed, one bale at a time. But the moment Karen's car was fully uncovered, the real fun began. The weight of the hay had done a number on the vehicle. The windshield had cracked, the roof had caved in slightly, and the doors were completely jammed shut. Karen let out a shriek that probably registered on the Richter scale. Jim whistled low. "Well, that's unfortunate." Karen spun toward him, eyes wild. "You are dead." Jim just smiled. "We'll see." Karen stood there, fists clenched, eyes wild, breathing like a bull about to charge. Jim had seen a lot of angry people in his life. Angry cows, angry neighbors, even an angry raccoon once, but nothing quite compared to a full-blown Karen realizing she wasn't going to win. Her face had turned a dangerous shade of red, her hands were shaking, and for a moment, Jim wondered if she might actually start throwing punches. "My car," she choked out, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "My beautiful, expensive, custom-imported car." Jim tilted his head, pretending to examine the damage. The windshield was cracked, the roof had a slight dent, and the doors weren't budging no matter how hard Karen tugged on them. He let out a low whistle. "Yeah, that's rough," he said, though there wasn't a hint of sympathy in his voice. Karen turned to him, nostrils flaring. You did this to my car." Jim shrugged. "I didn't do anything. Just stacked some hay. Gravity did the rest." Karen's eye twitched. You are going to pay for this. I will sue you for every penny you have." Jim sighed, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Well, you're welcome to try. But I have a feelin' you're gonna have a real hard time convincing a judge that you, someone who trespassed onto private property, refused to leave, and illegally parked in someone's hay shed, are the victim here." Karen's mouth opened and closed, searching for some kind of retort, but nothing came out. Sheriff Dale, still standing nearby with his arms crossed, finally spoke up. "Hate to break it to you, lady, but Jim's got a point. You're the one in trouble here." Karen whirled toward him, eyes practically bulging. "Me? You should be arresting him. This is vandalism. This is property destruction. This is. Dale pulled a folded-up paper from his pocket and held it out to her. "This is a fine. $10,000 for trespassing, illegal parking, and filing a false police report." Karen stopped mid-rant. The color drained from her face, so fast that Jim thought for a second she might pass out. Her lips moved, but no words came out. She blinked. Once, twice. Then, she let out a strangled sound. $10,000. Dale nodded. Yup. Might even be more if the mayor decides to add damages. Karen let out a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a scream. That's insane. That's criminal. You can't do this to me." Dale tucked his notepad back into his pocket. "Pretty sure I can. And I just did." Karen was shaking now, gripping her phone like it was a lifeline. "I'll fight this," she whispered, almost to herself. "I'll fight this in court. Jim smirked. "Well, that's one option." He rubbed his chin as if considering something. "Or, you could make a deal." Karen snapped her head toward him. "A deal?" Jim nodded. "Yup. See, instead of payin' that fine, you could work it off." Karen's face contorted. "Work? Here?" Jim shrugged. 200 hours on the farm should just about cover it. Feedin' the cows, balin' hay, fixin' fences. He grinned. You know, real work. Karen's face twisted in disgust. Absolutely not. Jim nodded. All right then. He turned back toward his house. Guess you better figure out how you're payin' that 10 grand. Karen stood frozen, her entire body rigid. For a moment, Jim thought she might actually take the deal. She looked at the sheriff, then at the fine in her hands, then back at Jim. But just as quickly, her pride took over. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and glared at him like he was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoes. I'll pay the fine, she spat. Jim shrugged. Suit yourself. Karen turned away, furiously typing into her phone. Jim could hear the absolute venom in her voice as she called someone. Probably her lawyer, maybe her husband, maybe whoever usually bailed her out of trouble. But Jim wasn't concerned. He had won. The tow truck arrived an hour later, much to Karen's horror. The driver took one look at the damaged car, let out a long whistle, and shook his head. Gonna cost a fortune to fix this, he muttered. Karen looked ready to explode again. She had screamed, argued, even threatened, but the reality of the situation had finally sunk in. She had lost. As the tow truck hauled her car away, she turned back toward Jim one last time, her eyes filled with pure hatred. You are the worst human being I have ever met, she hissed. Jim smiled. Ah, shucks. You flatter me. Karen let out a noise that might have been an attempt at a comeback, but she was already storming away before she could think of anything. She climbed into the passenger seat of a waiting Uber, slammed the door so hard that the driver jumped, and just like that, she was gone. The second the car pulled away, Cody let out a whoop. That was the best thing I have ever seen. Matt wiped tears from his eyes. Man, I thought she was gonna explode at the end there. Jim shook his head, chuckling. She might still. Sheriff Dale sighed. That woman's been a pain in my ass for years. Wouldn't be surprised if she leaves town after this one. Turns out, he was right. A few days later, the mayor himself stopped by the farm just to shake Jim's hand. Apparently, Karen had a long history of causing trouble in town, and this had been the final straw. Word had gotten around fast, and by the time the fine had been officially processed, Karen had packed up and left town. But the real prize came a week later, when someone from the local feed store showed up with a gift. Jim unfolded the large poster and burst out laughing. It was a perfectly edited image of Karen's car buried under hay, with the words, "Parking, you're doing it wrong." Jim hung it up in the barn, and every time he looked at it, he smiled.